Hi, I'm retired NYPD Detective Vic Ferrari, and welcome to NYPD Through the Looking Glass podcast, where you get unique insight into the New York City Police Department. Before we get started, I encourage you to check out my Amazon author page, where you'll find my series of behind-the-scenes NYPD books. They're $10 paperback or $2.99 ebook download, including my latest NYPD Behind the Blue Wall of Silence. Speaking of authors, today's guest is a retired NYPD sergeant turned author. He's written 15 books, including The Perfect Pawn. Andrew Nelson, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me on, Vic.
Andrew, please tell our listeners a little something about yourself.
Well, like you said, I'm a retired NYPD sergeant. I came on the job back in 1985, did 20 years, went up from police officer to detective, and ultimately retired as a sergeant. Worked in patrol, investigations, and a citywide supervisor at the end of my career. And like you said, back in 2013, or actually 2012, I began writing and became an author. Kind of sometimes hard to explain what genre I'm in. I like to say police procedural, but it kind of runs the gamut between mystery and thriller and psychological.
Well, why did you want to become a member of the New York City Police Department?
I always did. I'm, like I said, I'm one of the few people that, like at age 5, I knew I wanted to be a New York City cop. I grew up around them. My grandfather's friends were all cops. And to me, those were my heroes back in the day. And so it was just something that I worked towards, growing up. And as soon as I could, I remember standing in line to take the test. And back then, you actually stood in line. So, they went around the block. And I took it and passed and just had to wait a couple of years to come on the job.
Where'd your grandfather work?
He actually was a foreman for a trucking company. But that was in the 103 at the time. And so back in the 70s, when they had all the layoffs and times were tough, he would get cops jobs working for his trucking company. And so that's how they became friends.
So you were around them all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Where did you grow up?
In Queens, in Richmond Hill.
So there's a lot of organized crime figures that came out of Richmond Hill.
Yes, there are.
Gambino heavyweights, Ronnie One-Armed Churchio, and Charlie Caniglia, to name a few.
Well, we had John Gotti's Social Club in the 102.
Oh, is that where you grew up, in that neighborhood?
Yeah.
What was that like?
Surreal. And I actually remember, because every 4th of July, he would have an event where they would close down 101st Avenue. And so you'd see everybody out there. And sometimes it was, a little bit difficult to, you knew the one side of him, which was the organized crime, the head. And then he's throwing these, street parties for the people. So it's kind of was a very surreal time to watch the goings on. As a matter of fact, it actually gets mentioned in one of my books.
Well, I'm sure your parents and people that cared about you, like, stay away from those social clubs. Don't hang out with the kids that are going into those social clubs. And then, like you said, here comes the holidays. They're giving out turkeys or they're shooting off fireworks. And like you said, it's surreal. Like, yeah, but I was told they're the bad guys. And as a kid, I'm guessing it's kind of a little difficult to, manage that.
Yeah. You're seeing things and then you're hearing things, and so you're trying to, reconcile the two. But it was a different time when we were growing up.
What years were you active with the NYPD?
From 85 to 2005.
Okay, so I came on 87, so we're in the same wheelhouse. So the academy was basically the same as when I went in there. What NSU did you go to after?
17.
And what precincts did that cover, and what was that like for you as a kid from Queens getting thrown out in the street in Queens?
Well, it was a little bit different, because all of the NSUs, you're introduced to something that you were never used to. So we covered a bunch of different precincts. We covered the 111, the 109, 107, and so you'd be out there and you'd be walking a footpost in Bayside on a Thursday, and then on Saturday you're walking along Hillside Avenue in the 107, and that was strange because you'd be standing there on the corner and everything is nice and quiet, and next thing you know, on the opposite corner from you, the 103 shows up, lights and sirens, and you're like, what's going on? Because the radios, we weren't on the same frequency.
Oh.
So that could be a little bit, hair-raising at times.
I always say, like, when I was a rookie cop and I got thrown out in NSU 7 in the South Bronx, you're right, but it's an art to listen to the radio, and they don't prepare you for that in the police academy. And there were times there's a job right in front of you, and you're not putting two and two, and then the old timers would show up and go, hey, kid, why didn't you pick up this job? Well, sometimes it's a heavy. And they're like, you could have got yourself killed, and you didn't know that there was a shot. Well, I didn't hear shots, so it's an art to listen to that radio, and you're telling me now that the precinct was on another frequency.
Yeah, yeah. And especially, I mean, that was something that always kind of was amazed me, where you literally have the 107 and the 103 along that Hillside Avenue border, and the 103 was nonstop. And you're legitimately, 50 feet away, and you've got a robbery goes down. And you had no idea. I mean, did the person run past you? You've got the subway there. They go in on one side of the street, they come out on the other. So yeah, you always had to pay attention. No matter, even if your radio was quiet, you had no idea what was going on the other side.
So after NSU, you do your 6 months in NSU. Where do they send you?
I worked in both the 101 and the 102, and I worked bouts from those precincts for about 5 years total.
So the 101, that's the Rockaways, right?
Far Rock, yeah.
So for me, Bronx kid, the Rockaways always seemed like it was another planet. Like a few times that I went out there in the mid '80s, went to the beach. There's a lot of girls around. They had that little amusement park. Did
Yeah.
they have like a little amusement park there? But then I went out there a couple times in the wintertime, and it looked like something out of the movie Dune. It was like a vacant planet. There was no one around. The wind was
Yeah.
blowing around. What was that like as a rookie cop going there?
The sad thing, the tragic thing is that I was down there when Scott Goodell was killed.
I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah. And I worked with Scott the night before he was killed. So that's still haunting, here we are, 40 years later, because it's as vivid to me today as it was back then. And it was one of those weird things where he was going to his brother's graduation the next day. So he should have been working a 4 to 12 and ended up doing the 4 to 12 and then doing a day tour the next day. And at the time I was living in Rockaway. So I was on the peninsula. I passed their car as they were going to the job. And so it's one of those things where that was kind of like, that's when policing actually became real to me. And when you realize, here's a guy that you worked with the night before and he's gone. And my locker was basically right next to his. So that was a constant reminder. And so, all of a sudden it went from, the game of cops and robbers to real life. But yeah, the Rockaways are unique because basically you have, in the summertime, you have all of these people that come down to get to the beach. And then when, winter rolls around or fall rolls around, it just basically becomes a ghost town.
Did you and Goodell go to the 101 in the same class?
No, he was before. He came on in 84.
This is before I came on the job. I was actually going through applicant investigation while the Goodell homicide had happened.
They were in a radio car.
Okay.
They got flagged down and they went to the location. They split up. Scott went to the left. His partner went around to the right looking for Ralston. Scott engages with him in the gunfight. He's reloading and Ralston walks up and shot him in the head. But you're right. Yeah, it's back when we had the 38s. There were no speed loaders at the time. And, he was, it was an assassination.
Absolutely. And that's what led to the NYPD going to speed loaders and then 10 years later going to the 9mm. They finally got the hint that maybe we're underarmed out here.
Yeah. The NYPD moves at the speed of a battleship.
You're 100% right. There's no snap decisions. It takes forever. And then they put together little committees and they talk about it and they talk about it some more. The 101, was it a busy command?
Yes. Yeah.
What were the biggest challenges you had there?
It was a typical New York City urban environment. Heavy crime rate. It's kind of like back then you had the 100, which was on the western side of the peninsula, which was nice and quiet, and then you had the 101 on the eastern side, which was the Wild Wild West. So, it was one of those places where, on the midnight shift, you had two choices. You had to either go completely out of your command to the western edge of the peninsula to get coffee, or you had to go into Nassau County to get it, so. Yeah.
What was the makeup? Was there still of the precinct? Was there still a lot of Irish there?
No. It was predominantly minority community.
And there was tons of foot posts, I imagine.
There were foot posts there, Not a ton of them. It was a busy house.
Yeah, I'm probably getting that confused with the other precinct of the Rockaways because I remember there was a ton of Irish out there.
Yes, that's the 100. Yeah,
Oh, that's
that was
100.
actually at one time it was referred to as the Irish Riviera.
Yes.
Yes, yeah.
So do you
The
remember your
101
first?
was not that.
Oh, all right. My friend was a 4-3 guy, and he got himself jammed up a little. He was making too much overtime, and they sent him out to York. You probably know him well. So you said the 101 is a busy house.
Yeah.
Do any of the homicides stick out to you?
Yeah, there's a lot of tragic ones. I mean, actually, I remember there was one where, and it was the first time I ever felt the feeling of kind of like useless, for lack of a better word. There, because there was this mom that was holding her son who had just gotten gunned down, and he's dying in her arms, and she's holding him, and I'm trying to console her, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm a kid.
Right.
I mean, a year ago, I, you know, I was trying to fend for myself. Now I'm out here and I'm trying to solve the world's problems. And how do you console a mother as, her son is dying basically in her arms as you're holding her? And that was the one that kind of affected me the most. That realization that hit home, that just how dangerous things really are, because you kind of live in a bubble before you come on the job. I mean, you hear it on the news and whatnot, and then you come on the job and you're actually right there when it happens. And nothing prepares you for that. The academy doesn't prepare you for it. That's that gut wrenching stuff.
It's funny you should say that because I grew up in the Bronx, and I remember when they put me in the South Bronx, I was overwhelmed. And I thought I knew it all watching cop shows and stuff, and I'm like, what the hell did I just get myself into? And you're right, people are coming to you with their problems. And just a couple of years ago, I was in high school, and now I'm an authority figure or the voice of reason,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
scary.
It is, because they really should talk to you about this in the academy, but it's almost like it's this unwritten thing. We're all going to learn on our own, but you do. And because, you get thrown out there. And I remember, true story, I'm out in NSU and it's like my second or third day, because they give you a lot of training when you go out there. It's like, they take the kid that's just about to get out of NSU, they partner you up, and he's got 6 months on the job more than you, and he's going to tell you everything. So we get out there, and like I said, it's my second, maybe my third day most. And we pull over a car, and this is in the 109, and it's a 511. And he turns to me and goes, "Congratulations, you got a collar." And I'm like, what do I do? Anyway, we transport him back to the house. Everything you learn in the academy goes completely out the window. I have absolutely no idea of what I'm doing. I get set down at a desk, do the paperwork, and I remember this person actually helped me rolling their fingerprints because I was messing it up. Anyway, the shift is over. I'm still in the 109. Next thing I know, like hours have passed by. The training detective comes in and goes, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "I got an arrest." I have no idea what I'm doing. So yeah, it's like they throw you out there and it's like eventually you'll learn.
It's my experience with my first collar is exactly that. I mean, you had a suspended license. I was with a guy who had 6 months more than me, the older brother that's going to tell you how it is. Got stuck with this bogus crack collar. And you're right. And it was like at the end of a 4 to 12 in a busy Bronx precinct, and people are coming and going. I'm just standing there with my thumb up my ass. And as a rookie, you're right. You have no concept of time. And
Nope.
they want you out of there within 2 hours on a simple arrest like that. And it's so overwhelming. And I said, I'm never going to do this again. I got past it, but I get what you're talking about. So after the 101, you go to the 102, which is where you grew up in Richmond
Yeah.
Hill. What
Yeah.
was that like?
It was interesting because you grow up in an environment, and so I'm sure it's the same as you. You grew up in your small little community, and it's not until you come on a job, you get into that command, you go back to that command that you grew up in, and you all of a sudden you see the diversity of it. All of a sudden it's not like the 6 square block area that you grew up and all your friends were in. It's the miles wide command, and you learn like all the different areas of it. And so it was kind of strange seeing all of that, from a completely different perspective.
Well, yeah, and now as a cop, you're poking your nose into things.
Yeah.
Things look different as the kid coming, your mother sent you to the butcher shop. Now you're driving around and you're like, that doesn't look right, or what's
Exactly.
going on over here? It's like you were walking through life with blinders on. Did
Yes.
you? I'm sure you ran into a lot. I'm sure you got like a lot of double looks from people that now see you in uniform, but remind you, but remember you as a kid.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a very strange
I know.
scenario because all of a sudden now you're not the same person. You're an authority figure. And I remember at one time we got called to a DOA, and it turned out to be somebody, it was the grandparent of someone I knew. And that was very strange because you know how it is. When
Yeah.
you have a DOA, you got to wait. And so you're there with the family. And it was hard. It really was because you knew them on a personal level, but now you're here on a professional level. And it's kind of like a weird thing where
Mhm.
you're having to skirt a line that, you've never had to deal with before.
Right, and an NYPD cop stays with the deceased, even with the families there, and you're there until the medical examiner makes that determination: suspicious death, it's going to the morgue;
Yeah.
non-suspicious death. But even after he leaves and says they can call the funeral home, you stay there
Yeah.
until the funeral home. And it's the weirdest thing because you're in someone's house, and at first they're happy to see you, but now they're trying to grieve, and you're like a piece of furniture they don't want there anymore.
Yeah.
It's the weird, you feel like, I used to feel like, I have no business being here, but they're making me stay here.
Yeah. And I don't know if you've ever encountered it where you also then get the family members that decide that they're going to start divvying over, the deceased property. And it's like,
Yes.
no, time out, we're not doing this, and it can get confrontational. And
Yeah.
you have to find a way to, yes, I understand this is your loved one, and they probably would want you to have that. But this
But
is not the time or the place, and we're not going to do this here. And you kind of have to gently remind them that you are the one in charge, and it's going to go my way. You may
yeah.
not like it, but it is.
Right. And they start divvying stuff up, and you got to stop them because, with your luck, Aunt Ethel's going to come out of the woodwork and say,
Yeah,
that was promised to me, and that cop gave that to Uncle Vern. And you're right, it can get really weird and really ugly really fast.
yeah, yeah, it does.
So after the 102, you become a detective. Where did you get your detective shield?
I went into Queens, did investigations in Queens back when it was one borough, and actually had met a lieutenant. This was like one of those weird twists of fate. I had met a lieutenant that I worked with there who had been previously on Mrs. Dinkins' security detail. And through him, I ended up going to Intel.
Where'd you turn out of?
What in Intel?
Yeah, yeah.
At
Where'd you turn?
Poplar Street.
Oh, okay. And what kind of
Yeah.
cases did you work on?
In Intel, everything. It was kind of like a weird unit. Most of the time, I did like trying to think back the name of the Interpol. And I had a moment there. We get requests in from, and that was a very strange thing because we get a request in from say like the Russian government, and I'd be going out to Brooklyn to go sit on a location to find out what it was. So there was a lot of latitude with it. It was really interesting, and I actually had the luck of working for a fantastic captain. And when the Pope John Paul was originally coming in for his first visit to Shea Stadium, actually I guess it would be the second, I ended up getting assigned to do the security work for it. And so I started to do a lot of the security stuff for visiting dignitaries. Intel was a fantastic job. It was probably the best time I had on the job because it was so diverse in the things that I did.
So through Intel, I guess, and you did a lot of dignitary protection.
Yes, yeah.
Did you go at anyone famous?
Everyone from Pope John Paul II to President Clinton to Netanyahu to Arafat. I mean, it was just one continuous cycle of foreign dignitaries. Ultimately, I did the security survey for Shea Stadium when the Pope was coming in, but that got canceled because he suffered an injury. But then when he went to Aqueduct Racetrack the following year, I did that event, and it's very interesting because you're given an assignment to go out there, and you're working with the Secret Service, but it was my location. And so in the back of your head, you're trying to prepare. I mean, here it is, it's the Pope. And so there's a lot of pressure on you to
Yeah.
get it right the first time because you don't want to find yourself standing in front of Congress with your hand raised up saying, you swear to tell the truth about why things went south. But there's a lot of pressure, but there was also a lot of fun in doing all of that.
Yeah, I guarded Netanyahu once. He wasn't in power. He was trying to get
Hmm.
back in power. When you guarded him, was he with the Shin Bet?
He was a prime minister back then.
Oh, so he had
Actually,
he had the whole package
yeah,
with him.
yeah. So actually, I got called back as a sergeant, and I went back to Intel. And that last assignment for the UN, I actually had Clinton, Arafat, and Netanyahu at the same time. So you want to talk about three? That was
Heavyweights.
tough. I don't think I slept for that week.
But I'm sure you enjoyed your time working at Intel.
Yeah, it was different because even as a cop, you see things from a completely different perspective. You're there. Now you take it one step further when you're working protection. You are inside the fishbowl. You're
Right.
looking out. And it's something surreal about standing next to the president or standing next to the Pope. And you realize, just how different path your life took than well, just basically everybody else that you know. And I'll never forget, it was one of the strange things because I got a recording from Aqueduct Racetrack. And at one point, and I always tell people, because you never really understand the field of depth on a camera. There is none. So the Pope is out there and he's doing his mass, and there were a couple of detectives that were in camera. So they called out and they said, "Hey, get those guys off." So I have to go up onto the stage, and I walk up there and I grab them, but you can actually see me right over the Pope's shoulder, and it was like I got it afterwards, and I'm like, "Oh my God."
How long were you in Intel for?
For about 5 years until I got promoted sergeant.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Did you get grade?
No, no, God, no.
But you would. But if you would have stayed in Intel, you probably would have gotten grade. You had a great gig. So now I have to ask, why would you take the sergeant's exam?
Because no
well,
matter.
let me just stop. Let me just stop. For people that don't know the reason I'm asking Andrew this, no matter where you are, once you take that sergeant's exam, you get thrown right back into patrol again, and you got to do your time again and everything. And the sergeant will get into the pressures of being a sergeant. That's why I ask.
Yeah. And you'll know this, being a detective is like the greatest thing in the world. It's a great, well,
Yeah.
except for some of the slippage tours and things like that and
Right.
everything. But everybody knows the NYPD detective. I mean, it's probably the most famous,
Yeah.
title in the world. And there's a lot that goes with that. And I had a great time with it. But there's also that realization, and I'm sure you encountered it as well. You also do work for bosses that are not the greatest bosses in the world, especially at that sergeant rank, because as you go higher, the numbers dwindle. That sergeant rank is a huge rank. That at that time it was like about 4,000 people
Yeah.
that could impact your life. And I'd worked with some great bosses, but I also worked with some bosses that were less than desirable. And I thought to myself, you know what? It's hard to have somebody influence you when they're not as competent as you are. And so a lot of it went into that decision making was like, I'm going to basically, take this exam and I'll let the dice roll, but I'm going to remove a block of people from my life that have influence over me. So that was my
That's
reasoning.
interesting. Hey, I've never heard it quite explained that way, but you're right.
Yeah.
What was your first precinct as a sergeant?
Well, getting back to what you said, you get thrown to patrol? Theoretically, you do. Remember that captain I told you I worked for in Intel?
Yeah.
He had gone on to work for the chief of patrol. Oh, when I took the test, everything came out of B mock, and went to the 7-3. And like I tell people, my check went to the 7-3. I was getting ready. I was going in for a day tour the next day, and phone rings, and it's my old boss congratulating me. And he says, "Well, where'd you go?" And I said, "To the 7-3." And he says, "No, you didn't." And it kind of took me off guard. And I'm like, "Excuse me?" And he says, "No." He says, "Show up here tomorrow. You're on a telephone message." And I guess the work that I did for him while I was in Intel paid off, and he brought me in. So I never actually went to patrol. Um,
We would
I
get
said,
guys like
right,
that in
yeah,
auto crime.
huh?
Well, for those of you that don't know, in the NYPD, when you get transferred somewhere, every NYPD precinct has a finest system. It's like a teletype. I don't know what, it's probably an email now, but it was a
Probably.
big box would print up, and when transfers would come up, be like 20 names, and you would see who went from where, who got promoted going where. What Andrew's talking about is a telephone message log. It's totally different. That's a phone call that's coming from somewhere heavy that's saying, this guy's working here tomorrow. Well, that guy's he's there today. And we would get guys like that in auto grind. Guys would walk in and we'd say, "Where's my desk?" And you're like, what are you talking about? Like, we're looking for the finest vegetables. He goes, no, you'll get a phone call in a little while. And
Exactly.
sure enough, the guy was working there. So you go to
Yeah.
Chief of Patrol's office. What were your explain to our listeners what the Chief of Patrol's office is.
Okay. Well, like it says, Chief Patrol. It's basically the chief of all of the patrol forces throughout the city, all the precincts. And then at varying times, you have like ESU under it or whatnot. So it depends. And the funny thing is, I'm researching a book, or I've been researching a book for about the last 10 years of the shields of the NYPD, going back to when they consolidation. The chief section of the book is probably the hardest section to write because they're constantly changing the titles of chief. They do away with it one year, they bring it back another year, but it's been crazy. But basically, we were the investigative arm of the chief. Anything that went down in the city that he wanted more information about or needed to be looked into, we would get sent out and looked at it. We actually went out and did all officer-involved shootings. So if there was a cop that was involved in a shooting, we would go out on that as well. So it was a strictly investigative, but it covered everything. Back during Comstat, if there were issues with any of the reporting, we'd look at that. So we were basically jack of all trades for the chief.
So in the NYPD, if something unusual happens in a precinct, the patrol supervisor, the lieutenant, sometimes the commanding officer, they draft what's called a UF-49, which is an incident report. And that goes to the borough, and then it makes its way down to One Police Plaza. So I'm sure one of your responsibilities as a sergeant there was going through these 49s.
Yeah, you'd look through. Well, a lot of it, it depends because it would go up to the chief, and it would usually come downhill if he had questions about it and wanted it to be looked into further. We'd get it at that point. So, but it was one of those things where it was always something different.
Oh, yeah.
It was, you dealt with some stuff that you probably didn't want to deal with, and then there were other things that you would come completely out of the blue. So it was never boring. There was always something different going on. And then we'd go out and we'd cover events like West Indian Day Parade. We'd go out there and whatnot. And so you were always doing something different. So it kept it interesting. You didn't get bored in it. And then, when it hit the point where I was ready to retire, it was like, okay, I've pretty much seen everything. I mean, at this point, I can't go any further west or I'm going to be in Jersey. So it's time.
You know how it is with cops, and the rumors start flying, and a lot of times they're coming out of One Police Plaza. Unusual shooting. Cops in the Bronx will hear about a guy getting caught at Health Service Division with a prosthetic penis filled with clean urine trying to pass a drug test.
Yeah.
And then the story of the legend grows from there. Do you have any funny stories or unusual things that stuck out to you, of 49s that came across your desk while you were working at the Chief of Patrol's office? That you were like, this can't be true. And it was. And you don't have to name names, but...
Yeah, and unfortunately, it's one of those things where I can't even really say the situation because it would be very easily recognizable to anybody that was on the job when we were. So I got to really kind of, censor myself. One of the strangest things, though, because, and we did get involved in a lot of stuff that, would require a GO. Basically, what a GO 15 is, it's like we're telling you you're going to talk, or you're not going to be showing up for work tomorrow. So you're compelled to talk. And it was a very strange incident because I had done the investigation, and the cop was fine. It did absolutely nothing wrong. He came down there for this GO 15, and we get him in there, and he won't admit to being there. And I'm like, I saw you. So I'm kind of trying to I get it. You're nervous and everything. We're going to take a break and grab his representative, the attorney, out. And we say, he does know he did nothing wrong. And the attorney is like, he doesn't understand that. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, he got called down here. He thinks he's in trouble. I cannot get him to understand. He just has to answer the questions. We went back and forth with this. It was kind of like, how do you get him to understand? And he wouldn't. He wouldn't. And he wound up getting jammed up for something. And, that stuck with me because it's like, look, I've been out on the street. And yes, there unfortunately are always going to be cops that should never have been cops in the first place.
Yeah.
Okay. It always comes down to the crime of the heart, the crime of the mind. Okay. And you can get caught up in something and you just got caught up in the moment of it.
Right.
You didn't do anything wrong. And that was always my outlook of things, when you're doing an investigation like this, is always keep in the back of your mind, what were the intentions? And you never want to
Right.
jam up somebody and hurt them because their heart was in the right place. They just screwed up. Because I've been there. I actually had a
Well,
complaint made on me by a woman after we tried to help her. And that sticks with you. It's like, wait a second, I was trying to help you, and then you turn around and you complain about me. And it's like, okay, well, I guess then we're no longer helping people. So, it's strange, so there was a lot of things that went on, but unfortunately, like I said, some of them just, you kind of scratch your head and you go, really? You thought that was a good idea?
Well, you're right. They put the fear of God into you. And let's face it, PBA attorneys or union attorneys, you're not getting William Kunstler or Barry
No, you're
Slaughter.
not. No, you're not.
And their retainer. I talked to an ex-PBA attorney one time. Just happened to meet up with him at a party, and he goes, "Oh yeah, they got their retainer. You're a pain in the ass now that they got to send somebody down there to represent you." Who was the chief of patrol while you were down there?
When I first got there, it was Scanlon.
Okay, old
Yeah.
Bronx guy.
Yep. And when I left there, it was, oh God. It's hard because it's like, all of a sudden I'm an old man. It was like 20 years ago I retired. I'm trying to remember. But I worked for a lot of them. I worked for
Anemone?
Anemone.
That must have been, you
There.
could write a book about that.
Yeah. But there were a lot. We had a good time back then. I go back to a lot of our bosses. They were eccentric. I mean, you had a lot of very different personalities, but they were all, by and large, they were all good street cops. They had come up, through the ranks, and a lot of them, had a lot of street smarts. Yeah, they were kind of weird. I came on, Johnston was the chief of department. And he was kind of like Patton in many ways. Now everything has changed. You look at some of the bosses that are on the job now or in
Yeah.
recent past, and it's like, really? Okay.
Well, most NYPD members dread going to One Police Plaza.
Mm-hmm.
The parking sucks, and you
Yes.
never know who you're going to run into down there.
Yes.
What
Very
was it
true.
like coming from, patrol in Queens, then you're a detective for a while. Now you're going down to the Puzzle Palace every day. It's not like working in a precinct.
No.
It's totally different at One Police Plaza. How was that a change for you?
It was one of those things where you'd ride up one elevator and hear one rumor and go down the next elevator and hear a completely different one. It was interesting to see the inner workings of it. And where, like, when a chief walks in to a precinct, everything kind of freezes. Everybody
Somebody
stands
yells
up.
attention.
Yeah.
Someone yells attention. Everybody gets up. They
Yeah.
salute him.
Yep. But there's almost like a level of dread to it. It's all of a
Oh,
sudden,
yeah.
the stars are walking through the door, and it's kind of weird the way the whole atmosphere of a command will shift. In 1PP, it's different. Yeah, you'll get if a 3-star chief walks in, somebody will yell attention and whatnot. But by and large, you're constantly running into people, and I'm not saying that there's a breakdown in the rank structure, but there's a little bit more of a familiarity when you're dealing with people on a regular basis on there. That rank is no longer as imposing as it once was. And in many ways, when you start dealing with these bosses at that level, it's almost like you realize, yeah, you got 3 stars, but yeah, you probably should have never had 1 star. So you start to see the personalities behind the people there.
Well, and just as a detective and as a cop, I used to always be amused where I would walk into a precinct and I would see a guy pass the sergeant's exam and the lieutenant's exam, and I'm like, you've got to be kidding me.
Yeah.
But shame on me for not taking the test, and then to watch them rise through the ranks, and you're like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, this guy was the
Yeah.
biggest zero in the precinct, or this guy was the biggest washwoman, and now they're telling people what it's kind of scary.
It is. It is. And I actually, during the course of my career, actually worked very closely with people that were sergeants and lieutenants, who ultimately went on to, achieve,
Yeah.
3-star rank. And were nice guys. I mean,
Right.
had nothing. But you also realize that I saw other people that would rise up. And I'm thinking to myself, no, no, you should never have gone past captain. There should have been no discretionary promotions for you. And it kind of almost like reminds me of like, where you got promoted so they could get rid of you.
Right.
They promoted you. Congratulations, you're going to be a deputy inspector and you're in charge of paper clips, in the basement of 1PP. And so it's one of those things where you pass the test, but that's it.
Well, let me ask you this. After you go to the chief of patrol's office, did you get hit up by your former coworkers and friends for favors? Can you get me in here? Can you get me transferred there?
No, not really. I mean, if I had gone maybe from patrol to the chief of patrol, it would have been different. But I came from intel to the chief of patrol. So there really wasn't anybody. I mean, I call people up from intel, It was like, back then, back in the 90s, in that period of time with the department, you had two commands. You had intel and you had ESU. And those were basically the two commands that you just didn't go to. You had to basically get asked to come into it. There was no, teletype looking for people. It's changed a little bit now, but yeah, those were the commands that you basically needed a hook to get into or a phone call to be made. And so it was different. No one was really calling because, they already had everybody in their Rolodex that they needed.
The Dex. See, you're
Yeah,
dating us that we would even
I
go to
am.
the Rolodex. And you and I followed similar paths after we retired. We both moved out of state. We both took jobs with local police departments. Can you
Yeah.
go into that, what it was like for you to take a job with a local police department?
Culture shock. Culture shock.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what, it increased my respect for these local guys
Yeah, oh, yeah.
because, and I'm sure you understand this as well. The NYPD is the biggest police department in the United States. We were bigger. I mean, at the height, we were like what, at about 50,000 uniformed.
Yeah.
We were bigger than some countries' standing armies. So when you needed something, you got it. I mean, if you needed a helicopter, if you needed an emergency service, if you
A
needed a
horse.
boat, a horse, I remember I called a 13 one time, and within 30 seconds, you could hear sirens screaming from every direction. And going into local law enforcement, and I'm not sure where you were at, but where I am, I mean, the county is 800 square miles. That's a lot of distance. And your backup is half hour, 45 minutes away, lights and sirens. So you realize just how tough they have it. And so the amount of crime obviously isn't the same. I mean, and I'm sure, being a Bronx guy, there were times back in the 80s where meal was in
Yeah.
your car.
Yeah.
And it was between calls. People always ask me, why do you eat so fast?
That's true.
Well, because I like hot food and it's not going to stay hot.
That's true.
And so you don't have the volume of calls, but that risk is so much higher because you never know what you're going into locally. And like I said, if you need help, it's going to take a while to get there. So I developed a sense of respect for them.
You got to think differently when you're a cop in a smaller police department like the NYPD. You could, even if you had a foot post, like, I'm going to stop this guy, and if it goes sideways, I'll just get on the radio and call a 13, and the
Yeah,
cavalry will be here in second.
yeah,
I remember driving around at midnight, seeing a guy by a 7-Eleven. I'm like, I don't even know where I am.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, if this goes into a foot pursuit, I don't know. If I was in the Bronx, you could blindfold me. I know Northeast,
Right,
out,
right.
not down here. So, Andrew, after you retired from the NYPD, you got into writing. What
Yeah.
started you on that path?
It was actually a very interesting journey on that. It started back when I was on the job. in New York, and this is pre 9/11. My wife and I had always been, big readers. I was always a fan of, Tom Clancy and Frank Herbert. So we read a lot of different genres. And so we were talking one day, and she said that, it would be difficult, in her opinion, to write a book. And me, of course, being, an idiot, said, no, I'm sure, because as a detective, you do 61s, you do DD5s, and,
You're
you
always right.
craft the narrative and everything. So I was like, no, I think, it should be pretty easy. So she said, well, go ahead. You're so smart. Write a couple of chapters. So I did. And she liked it. And I'm like, yeah, okay, but you're my wife and everything else. Then 9/11 happened and everything kind of took, went on the back burner, retired, went to work for the local. And after I left, I was bored. And she said, well, why don't you write that book? And I'm like, I don't even remember what I wrote. She's like, I do. And so she had saved the papers. And I started to, sat down and, it's okay, I got to craft out this story. And I realized I actually enjoyed it. I enjoyed the creation of characters and worlds and everything. And, in your writing especially, you draw from a lot of your experiences. And one of the biggest influences on me was Joe Wambaugh,
Yeah.
who was an LAPD cop. And I had read all of his early works from, New Centurions, The Onion Fields. And I wanted to do that for people that were inclined to, lean towards the NYPD. So you have, NYPD Blue, you have NYPD Blue Bloods. There's an audience out there for this. But I wanted them to go deeper the way Wambaugh did with his depiction of LAPD cops. And so I set out, obviously not in the first book, but in the first book, McGuire, who's the main character, he's a former Navy SEAL and retired NYPD detective, gets pulled into an investigation that he kind of goes into, where his former high school flame goes missing from a one-car accident in upstate New York. So you're introduced to him, you're introduced to his background in that. But as the series progresses forward, it becomes much more, NYPD oriented through the character progression on there. And I wanted to bring that reader into that world to show them something, like the intrigue of One Police Plaza, you
Right.
know, to give them that insight a little bit more on it and to craft these characters and show them not only in like the traditional superhero type protagonist, but as the individual. So you're pulled into a radio car where two cops are just joking around, and you get that camaraderie. But at
Right.
the same time, you go from and you've experienced and I've experienced. You're sitting there having coffee, talking and joking around, and then all of a sudden, holy hell breaks loose, and it happens like that. And I wanted the reader to experience that.
And you have a series of books, correct?
I do. I do. Actually, and I don't know why I did it this way. My writing is eclectic, and I'll tell the reader that up front. I have three series. One is James McGuire, the other is Alex Taylor, and the other one is Angelo Antonucci. McGuire is the main protagonist in all of it. Alex Taylor is his former partner from the 7-3, and she's the opposite of McGuire. I always say that McGuire is the quiet professional. Alex Taylor is the one that's going to grab the telephone book and have a discussion with you. That's it. She's the old school cop who got bounced off of the job for a drinking problem, and her shot at redemption as because of McGuire, he gets her a job as the chief of police in some obscure town in upstate New Hampshire. So she has her own books, and then you have Angelo Antonucci, who's a cold case detective, and his books were more like novellas that I wrote in between the longer books. But the worlds all mesh together. So if you're looking to get the entire reading, the whole universe, you have to start off with McGuire, and then you kind of leapfrog in between the different stories because they all tie in to one another.
How many books you've written? 15, right?
Yeah, yeah. A couple of nonfiction, but mostly all of them have been fiction books.
Can you give us some of the titles of your books? I know for 15, I know you're not going to rattle all 15 off the top of your head, but and I'm going to have them posted. I'm going to have their photos and everything pop up.
Okay. Well, the first book that you want to start off with is Perfect Porn, which, as a New Yorker, was the worst title you
I
could
know
ever
why.
come up with for a book, especially when I have to do an interview out here in the Midwest,
With a Queen's
because,
accent?
yeah, I got to slow that down and I have to enunciate. It's perfect porn.
On.
Porn. I actually was doing a radio interview and I saw, and then from there it goes into Bishopsgate back to McGuire. So you have these progression of books on there. But if you read them in the order, and if you go to my website, which is andrewgnelson.org, there's a chronological list on there. You can read them individually, but they won't make as much sense to you because there's an overarching. And I go back to was a voracious Tom Clancy reader. So you've got Jack Ryan, and that book, those books are just a progression of Jack Ryan's life. And that's the way I envision McGuire. So you're going to get introduced to people. It's kind of like sort of like Robert Parker, where he had different characters that came into each other's worlds.
Where can our listeners find your books? Where they're available?
Well, obviously Amazon. They're available on Kindle and also in print. You can find them at Barnes and Noble, Books a Million. You can even order them from Walmart.
You got into Walmart, huh? That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, you don't
And I'm
even have to
saying that,
leave your home.
and I'm being sincere about that because I know how difficult it is to get your books into brick and mortar stores. Andrew,
Yeah.
where can our listeners get a hold of you for speaking engagements or other podcasters want to do interviews?
The best place is to go to andrewgnelson.org. That's my website. You can find me on Twitter. I'd be lying to you if I told you the handle. It's Andrew underscore and whatnot. But if you go to my website, there's links to the social media and there's also a way of contacting me through there.
Andrew Nelson, thank you so much for spending your time with us today.
Thank you for having me, Vic.
And as always, I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in, especially my listeners in Kearney, New Jersey, Douglasville, Georgia, Pearl River, New York, Monkina, Illinois, New Britain, Connecticut, Red Bank, New Jersey, and the city of St. Peters, Missouri. If you work in law enforcement or had an interesting criminal background, please drop me a note on Twitter or Instagram at VicFerrari50. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit the like and subscribe buttons. And if you enjoy the content, check out my Amazon author page. Like Andrew's, just type in my name, Vic, Ferrari like the car, where you can preview all my books for free. And check out Andrew G. Nelson's books on Amazon. Thank you again, everyone, and have a great day.